welcome everyone to Istanbul Media Talks. Today we have the honor to invite a very great personality in the domain of digital media. Our today's guest is the manager of digital strategy at TRT World, and Mr. Riyad Minty is also a co-founder of AJ Plus as part of Al Jazeera Media Network. Mr. Riyad is also recognized as a leader in the space of digital media. He regularly gives conferences around the world. And Mr. Riyad Minty is also responsible for developing the social media strategy for all Al Jazeera network, like English, Arabic, documentary, sport, Turkish, Balkans, and Kiswahili. Mr. Riyad Minty, please, would you like to share with us your experiences and knowledge in the domain of digital media? Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you for the introduction. Thank you for hosting me. When Tanner actually asked me for a bio, I wrote a different one, which was, I work in digital media, I do stuff on the internet. I often get the credit for the hard work of many other people, some of them who are here today. I just happen to be the face of 100 people working behind the scenes doing amazing work all the time. And one day when I'm done with media, I hope to open an ice cream shop somewhere in the world. And that's kind of, I guess, where I come from, and at least my current bio. All of the other titles and accolades that are there are all just fluff. And it's stuff that's there that you accumulate over time as you kind of work in the space, because digital media kind of does that to you. It puts you up on a pedestal. People see the good, they see all the nice things, and they don't actually see all the hard work and the grind behind that. Switch to this one, all right. All right, so one thing is I do land up speaking very fast, and my accent can be difficult. So if I am speaking too fast, just put up your hand and tell me to slow down. I am guilty of that. And also for the session, I wanted to be an interactive session. I'm not here to sit and lecture you. We have enough professors, I guess, who do that all the time. And I'm keen to also hear from you. Because if I was to ask, can I get a show of hands, who is older than the age of 25? Older than 25, right? And half the people who put up their hands I actually know or work with, right? I should get up and leave, because I think even the topic, the future of digital media, is pretty redundant. How many of you actually watch traditional media, TV, or read a newspaper, right? 2 or 3, and you are actually studying media, right? How many of you is your primary source of media on digital, right? I would assume it's most of you, right, where you get your news online first. So talking about the future of digital media is really just talking about the future of media. There is no space in that. And I always feel that my role working in digital media over the years is to kind of make my position redundant, that you don't actually need a director of digital in an organization. You don't need to have a digital team. You just have a media team that's able to produce content across multiple platforms that can relate to audiences in a way that's authentic to the audience and authentic to that voice. Now, I'll just tell you a bit more about myself and how I kind of landed up in this space. I'm South African. I'm actually a dropout from university, so I do land up speaking at a lot of university campuses, which is why I think Tanner said anti-academics. So I dropped out after my first year. I had a startup in South Africa that focused on producing content for mobile devices. The reason I kind of got into this was because my final year of high school was 9/11. And in high school and kind of growing up, I went to a non-Muslim school. There was a lot of questions I had about identity. And when you turned on the news, we saw a lot of people speaking on my behalf, trying to represent me as a Muslim and my views. And that was very frustrating for me, because why are other people on CNN and everywhere else been able to talk and represent me and my voice? Why can't I just speak for myself? And it was around about, I guess I'll date myself, I think around 2000, 2001, when I was in high school. And it was also when the first camera phones started coming out. And I don't expect many of you to remember, but it was those very big Nokia phones, and it was the first time before even 3G technology came out, you had the ability to take a photo and just send it to friends, be it very low quality, but it was starting to enable this connection where anyone from anywhere in the world could sit and talk to each other. Even prior to that, we had tools like IRC chat. I don't know how many of you ever heard of IRC chat. Anyone heard of MIRC? Like a few people, right? So, or ICQ or MSN. These were kind of the primitive versions of WhatsApp, I guess is the best way to explain it. But I was able to talk, and I was able to communicate with people from around the world and kind of tell my own story that felt true to me. And I had an opportunity, sort of my first year of university, where technology was coming out, to go out and actually start producing content for mobile devices and see what we could do. So we started off initially doing a lot of sort of entertainment content, but we also did a lot of Islamic content within South Africa, and we kind of grew as a company, which was good. Didn't make a lot of money, but we became one of the biggest providers and producers of mobile-based content on mobile devices in South Africa, and expanded to different regions. At the same time, the war in Iraq was starting to break out. And the Director General of Al Jazeera at the time, well, previous Director General Wadda Khanfur, was actually a correspondent in South Africa, and I got to know him through his time in South Africa. And we said, listen, this war is breaking out, but we only seen one side of the story. And via SMS technology, Al Jazeera is able to report. They were on the ground, and I think the whole notion was where one network was showing where the missiles were taking off, they were the network that was showing where the missiles were landing. And I think it was important to kind of tell that story. So we pitched a lot of projects to Al Jazeera at the time through my own company. They said no to me many times. So I kind of went off and did my own thing until a few years later, when technology kind of started becoming a lot better, and they invited me to kind of reapply, and they got me out to join the new media team at the time and try and figure out what the future of media would be. So we are part of a new media team trying to think 5-10 years ahead, and what is this impact of technology going to have really on us as humanity, as on society, and how can we use technology to communicate a story that often is underportrayed in media. And that's kind of how I got my start in media, and I ended up moving to Doha with my wife, Rana, and we lived there, and kind of this team just hacking away. And I was, I think, 22 years at the time, probably as old as many of you are. And because we were young, no one really took us seriously. So we used to sit in sort of this corner office. People would laugh at us. I remember when I started the first Facebook page for Al Jazeera, many people came and told us to shut it down because it cheapens the brand and it's childish. Why do you want to have this? And these were kind of the fights that we were having at the time. And we didn't have a lot of management support, so we still did it anyway. I couldn't speak Arabic, so I would go to the Arabic website, just take a link, post it on Facebook, post an update. When that account reached 500,000 followers, that was the first time that people within the organization started paying attention, saying, actually, what's going on here? Like, who are these kids that are actually doing output? Reaching a much bigger audience than the TV screens were reaching, and then we started becoming more mainstream within the organization. The reason I'm telling the story is because often people always introduce me as the AJ Plus guy, which I did, but it's often the stuff we did before AJ Plus that's probably the most interesting and the most fascinating, because it was getting in at a time where I was able to speak my truth and find a platform where I could tell my story and stay authentic to that with my team, and we were able to do that. And through that approach of just kind of putting stuff out there, we were able to build audiences and in a way eventually revolutionize the way in which media is consumed across devices. Today, every media organization around the world that you look at is kind of copying the AJ Plus style with videos, text on screen, social feeds, vertical videos, all these sort of things. But all of that started way back when we were just a bunch of kids that nobody believed would do much, and we were able to put it together. When it came to Twitter, we were the first organization in the world to live tweet a war, which was 2008, 2009 during the Gaza war, where we literally just sat there, and as things were happening in Gaza, we had our correspondents giving us information. We would just post updates and post it on Twitter, and that was it. It was a simple tool. We grew the account only at that time to 10,000 followers, which back then was influential. Again, no one paid attention to it. But I distinctly remember one of the most important moments in my life and my career was just after that, when I traveled to the US and was speaking at a conference. A professor came up to me and said, hey, I followed that Twitter account, and it completely changed my perspective of what was happening in Palestine. And this professor actually went back and rewrote their coursework to teach the class differently, because they were able to be exposed to that media for the first time, coming directly from people on the ground in Gaza. So often it's not about the scale or the followers that you have, it's about the impact. It's about actually telling those stories, and the right people need to do it. And are you part of that conversation? What are you adding to the conversation that's online? Now, I think one of the things that challenges us most, specifically coming, I guess, from the Muslim world or from sort of the global south, the stories that are told about us are often always very negative. So I just want to do one thought exercise with you, and if you can tell me what's the first word that comes to your mind when I say the city name, just say the first word that comes to your mind. So when I say New York, what do you think about? What? Lights. Okay. If I say anyone else, New York? Work. Okay. London? Rain, fog. So, yes. Paris? Evil. Evil, love. Okay. That's a very wide range. Love. Anything else? Art. All right. Kabul. Afghanistan. All right. War. All right. Baghdad. All right. Yeah. Istanbul. But you all live here, right? So that's. And so, I mean, there's a professor. He has an amazing book. His name is Alain de Botton. He has a book called The News. And he takes sort of a psychological profile of how we consume news and what the default state is. And what you can see from this is, the second you mention New York, we think of work, we think of lights, we think of happy thoughts. London, granted, fog, weather, but it's still not war. Paris, it's a city of love. But the second we start going towards the global south, our first perception is always going towards the negative sides. We don't think about the rich history and culture that Afghan civilization has given us. We don't think about the rich history and culture that we got from Iraq. I mean, academia, some of the greatest scholars of our time came from Iraq, but our first perception is going to war, right? And that's because the default state that we see in media, not just news, looking at entertainment, when you watch any show on from Hollywood or anywhere else, you've seen the default state is positive. When you see Paris depicted in media, you see it is positive. When you see any of these cities, it's positive, but when you get to other countries, the default state is always war. You don't actually see media set in these countries in a positive state. So when something happens in a news cycle that's different to the norm that we taught, we often have bigger reactions. And I think that's why we always feel, why are people reacting this way about an attack in Paris, but they don't react the same way when 100 people are killed in a bomb blast in Iraq? Why are people reacting this way when a few amount of people killed in New York versus anywhere else? It's because the steady state that we've been taught over time has always been very romanticized in that space, and this is an extreme. The other steady state, it's always war, so we're not as shocked, not as outraged in this sort of space. And I really recommend, even if you're not going to read his book, just listen to his TED Talk, Alain de Botton, about this topic, but it got me thinking a lot about this. And over the last year, I sort of, the first time, transitioned my role out of news after doing it for a good 15 years of my life, in TRT now, where I started off with TRT World, building TRT Arabic on the news side, but I've now moved to focusing more on TRT across our other content verticals, from children's content, our drama series. How many of you have watched Dirilish or heard of Dirilish Ertugrul, right? Which is produced by TRT. We produce a whole lot of other drama series, which are really fascinating. They get into values. We have sports content. We have an art and culture channel, TRT2, that gets into art and culture. We have a documentary channel, which is sort of like Discovery, National Geographic, that's actually starting to retell stories from a different perspective. And I realized that specifically when I was younger, I was also always very angry, very out there. This is what's happening to us. This is why people are not telling our story. We need to be present in the news. We need to be doing this. We need to have our voices heard. We need to be out protesting, and this form of activism that always comes with what we need to do. But we also need to have a legacy, and we also need to draw on our strengths of our culture and our history and actually go back and have sort of this longer form, deeper understanding and deeper retelling of our narrative. And telling our own stories through drama series, through movies, through even from children's content, from foundational content. And when I started looking at kids' content, I realized, like, how many of you watched Cartoon Network as kids, right? Or Cartoon Network content. How many of you think that's actually content that kids should be watching in terms of the storyline, right? No, it's funny, it's entertaining, but you're not actually learning anything, right? And to a large extent, some of the shows are also very problematic in terms of the messaging that they're putting across. So why aren't we actually producing quality kids content, which is very foundational for children from a young age, which actually shapes your identity? Our exposure, even from a young age, from when we're kids, is still very much from a very specific Western-centric understanding of the world, completely disconnected from our sense of culture, completely disconnected from our sense of identity. And so to come back to the topic of what is the future of digital media or future of media, for me, the future is telling our own stories. The future is this authentic voice. It's really, when it comes to media, it doesn't really matter about the platform. It really doesn't matter whether it's on Facebook or Instagram, wherever it is. If you are telling your story, telling a true story, staying true to yourself, to your sense of identity, you are able to kind of build that narrative. And the one thing I would really encourage a lot of people to do is also get into the arts, get into production, because it's one thing being in front of a camera and being able to be represented in terms of your screen identity, and you can see those changes happening with, take a movie like Black Panther, which was the first time you maybe saw Africans really identified with in a positive light in a blockbuster hit movie, or Crazy Rich Asians as a movie that represented the Asian community, which also was a very big blockbuster movie. We need to be getting into writing scripts, writing stories, writing the production side of things, because if we only focus on the news cycle, if we keep on focusing on what's happening right here, right now. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can tell you that the news isn't getting any better. The world we're living in is not getting any better. After all of this, we still land up with Trump as president, for example, or we still land up with all these other issues that we have. The largest humanitarian crisis of our lifetime in Syria. This should not be happening today. This should not be happening in our lifetime, and we always say never again. It happened in Rwanda, we say never again. It happened in Iraq, we say never again. It happened in Afghanistan, we say never again. It's happened in Syria, and we'll say never again until the next country, until the next story. And because of this, we're living in an outrage age. And I think, like, when I wake up in the morning, I really just feel like tweeting, what are we outraged about today? Like, it's just, we're outraged about a topic today. Next week, we're outraged about something else. Next week, we're outraged about something else. Next week, we're outraged about something else. And we're very caught up in this angry outrage culture where we're just going on. We spend a lot of time complaining, and digital tools, as much as they're great, and like very much at the forefront of technology, have the harm in creating a false sense of activism, a false sense of actual impact, because we think just because we tweeted something or we posted something online, we've done our job. And great, I can go back to my life. It does not end there. And until we actually get involved in the deeper production, the deeper storytelling, the deeper analysis of that, we are always going to be one step behind. We're always going to be catching up to the news cycle. We're always going to be chasing the next headline or the next headline until, we don't know where it's going to go. Now, I'll talk a bit about platforms because I think it is important in terms of understanding the way in which technology is changed or is shaping us as humanity. Because often when we talk about digital media, the first perception is it's millennials or zennials or whatever other definition they'll come up with in the future. It's a younger generation of people. But if you look at the evolution of media, and the reason I go back to what I started with IRC as a chat, is there's an early group of adopters that are probably round about my age-ish that grew up with the internet when we were teenagers. Was the first time we were exposed to the internet. So we kind of pre-internet with the internet growing up. So when I was 13 was the first time I started using IRC chat, which was fulfilling a need in me as a 13-year-old to connect with my friends, hang out, meet new people, have just cool chats and kind of hang out online in this sort of space. As I got slightly older, I wanted to have more one-on-one conversations with people. That's when MSN Messenger came out, or ICQ, more direct one-to-one communication with an identity. As you got to university, that was the birth of MySpace. How many of you have ever heard of MySpace? Right. The MySpace generation, which was the personal branding generation, probably the Instagram of its time. But MySpace was very much about branding yourself, about you can be an influencer, you kind of have your own MySpace, and you can tell the world what you're about. As we got older, MySpace kind of went away. It's when Facebook kind of started coming up because we were in university. Facebook started off by connecting people at campuses. You had to have a university email address to connect with people in your campus, so it was fulfilling a need of connecting people with that age space. As those people got older, we got onto Twitter. And Twitter was more information sharing. So you're connecting with people in the industry around ideas because you kind of end of university starting to work, so you want to start connecting around ideas, and that's the birth of Twitter. That Twitter generation, then LinkedIn started growing. You wanted to start getting a job. So you realized I need to delete my MySpace profile because I'm not going to get a job. I need to have a LinkedIn profile that's more professional in order for me to get a job. And so on, this sort of technology has kind of followed this evolution of sort of this age group of where we are, or my age group is today. Netflix. Now maybe we're slightly older, we can afford a Netflix account, we can afford subscription-based, we're able to stream content. So our habits the technologies are really matching our habits as we're growing up. And the best way to maybe explain this is also, if you look at YouTube, YouTube had a problem about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago, where kids were stumbling upon a lot of content that they shouldn't have been seen, and they had a big problem with porn or adult sort of content on the platform. People were always complaining, why doesn't YouTube have enough filters for this? And no one knew why. Until one day, all of the filters were turned on, and the CEO of YouTube, Eric Schmidt, he said that he also was wondering what was going on, what just changed all of a sudden. And what they realized was the engineers at YouTube started having kids. And because they started having kids, they started seeing the platform through the eyes of parents, and they realized, actually, I don't want my kids to be seeing this. So then they actually built the tools based on that sort of space where they were, whereas before that, yeah, you could complain about it, but it really wasn't relevant to me. And so as this generation is growing up, and as I continue to get older, as you continue to get older, technology and new things that don't exist will continue to evolve. The next iteration will probably be something for families, how to connect your kids. And I think we'll go back to, for younger kids, sort of platforms or e-learning platforms that will go there. How do you parents stay connected with the younger generation? How do you stay connected with your extended family? As we get older and our habits as an older generation change, platforms that haven't been invented yet will come across. Now, the next generation after me, which is probably not even your generation, followed the same pattern. So instead of IRC chat, they would have had a different platform, be it on mobile platforms, WhatsApp, whatever it is, Telegram, that kind of emerged. Instagram replaced that, sort of MySpace generation. TikTok is also that sort of creative platform, or Snapchat, that's fulfilling sort of that younger need of what you want right now. The next phase, as you get older, there will be a new version of Facebook, or Facebook will iterate whatever it is to find something for you. As you're going through university, you're going to find a need to connect with your peers that you are with. Even living in a foreign country, you're going to want to stay connected around ideas space. That platform may not exist yet because you're a different generation that needs to go there, and that's a space for this to be built. As you start getting more professional into the workspace, you may find different avenues to kind of explore beyond LinkedIn, because as LinkedIn gets much bigger, it's much more difficult for people to discover you, so they might be sort of for a younger generation. So technology will always evolve and develop based on our needs as humans. And that's largely because if you go all the way back to when we were as even prehistoric times, when humans were first created, we used to sit and draw pictures on the wall and tell our stories of the hunt. When we went out, people would sit around a campfire and tell a story. Because we are designed to share. We are designed to talk to each other. We are designed to be a collective. And through different phases within our life, we'll go through different modes where our needs and the way in which we'll do it may change or adapt, but that inherent need to tell a story or to share a story will always be there. And that is consistent. So when we talk about the future of media, future of digital media, it hasn't been invented yet. And I always say this, that is that, like, it's really not a topic I like to talk about, because if anyone can tell you what media is going to be like in 2-3 years' time, they honestly have no idea what they're talking about. And if ever you sit in a digital media talk and someone sits down and says, I'm going to tell you what the future is, probably don't listen to that person. I mean, because there's zero way of telling you that. If a person is able to sit down and talk to you a bit more about storytelling, okay, maybe there's a bit more to it, because really, when you strip away everything else, you strip away the followers, you strip away all the likes, you strip away all of the endorphins we get from the likes. At the end of the day, we are all looking for sharing something, we're looking for validation, and we're looking for connectivity. That's really what it comes down to in terms of those pillars. Now, the challenge that we have, and I think the biggest challenge that we're going to actually have as humanity, is we haven't really understood the impact this is going to have on us psychologically. So even if you go into things like VR, The Guardian did a really interesting VR experience around solitary confinement, where you could experience what it was like to be in a prison cell under solitary confinement, and you'd put on the headset for 7 minutes, and you just hear sort of the voice telling you what it was like. And people who went through this experience after 7 minutes came out somewhat traumatized. They came out somewhat a bit more, I guess, they didn't know exactly how to deal with it because of the shock that they went through. Wait for the sound to finish? Okay. So people were a bit more traumatized in this experience, and people with VR, and when you're having this immersive experience where you've been immersed in a completely different world, we really don't understand the psychological impact that has on us and how we actually see the world. And these sort of new ways of storytelling, where all of a sudden you can be teleported into a different space and into a different experience, where you can experience what it was like to be a refugee, or experience what it's like to live in someone else's shoes, or to be in solitary confinement, or to be in a different space, can have a very big impact on our ability to actually understand each other and understand our stories a lot more authentically. And I think that going back to it again, it's still that need to share. And the psychological impact, even beyond VR, looking at Instagram, for example, right now are thinking of hiding the like button, the like counts, because they're realizing that people are doing things just for the shares or for the likes. And inherently, that's making us, I guess, a not very pleasant generation, because half the time you go out, we're sitting on our phones. This is probably the first time actually that I'm giving a talk where people are actually listening and not sitting on their phones, but generally everyone's sitting on their phones immediately sharing what's going on. And a lot of the time, again, you're looking for, again, that sharing experience, but you're also looking for that endorphins. And they're experimenting with, if they take away that like button, would people still share? Would you still be doing it? Would you still be putting yourself out there in the same way or not? And I think for us, there is a desperate need to also bring in a value-based understanding. There's also a non-Western sense of understanding of what is meaningful to us. What do we define as value? Is it just the likes? Is it just impact? Or is it enough just to tell our story? And social platforms, to a large extent, have driven us or created this environment where we feel we always need that more. You always need to post next. You need to keep up with it. You need to keep up with it. But do we really need to? And would we just be happier if we just sometimes would put our phone down and just connect and have a conversation with someone around us? And I always find that, like, if you're out with friends and you're having dinner and someone is having a WhatsApp conversation, it is honestly the same as if I was to take up my phone, just go there and have a separate conversation with someone else. You're removing yourself from that moment. You're removing yourself from being present in the right there and now, which inherently the problem is that we're stopping to build real world connections. We're stopping to build real relationships. We're stopping to build anything meaningful because we are more interested in having a conversation with our friends on WhatsApp, or more interested in seeing who commented on my last Instagram post and responding to them. So we're no longer living in the now. We're living in this sort of digital world, and a digital space is largely a mental space that's there, which can be very frustrating, can be very restrictive, and can have very longer-term psychological impacts on us as a generation as we get older. And we start seeing that even as we get into a workplace. And as you start working with people who are very much from this me generation, you can start seeing it's managing different age groups, and I'm fortunate enough to manage people who are older than me, people who are younger than me, and all the way people sit out of university. You can see a very different sort of wiring in terms of expectations that even comes in from a younger generation. And I know millennials generally get a very bad reputation. I'm a millennial. I was a millennial in a newsroom, also going fighting with everybody. Noor was one of our millennials who just joined us. But there's a passion that comes with that too. And there's an energy that comes with that too. And I think that for us who are older also is to understand that that passion and energy is really that authentic self when you're working in media. And as you go into your professional workspace, whatever you're going to land up doing, I would say regardless of what you're doing, as long as you stay true to you, stay true to your identity, stay true to that need to share, to tell stories, or to enable other people to tell their stories, because a big part of media is enabling other people to tell their stories. People will connect with that. People will see it, and people can see through all the nonsense. They can see through when you're just doing something for the likes or for the clickbait or for whatever else we're doing it for. But we really need to go back to sort of those basic elements of understanding, those basic base needs that we have as humans to kind of connect with each other.
Okay, thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Mr. Riyad Minty, for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. And we hope we'll meet you again. Thank you. And we have tea and coffee outside. You can enjoy it before going home. Thank you very much.
Cool.